So briefly, David Harrison. My former life, I was a jockey here in Toronto. I was actually an NBA basketball player. After NBA, went to Morgan Stanley. After Morgan Stanley, I started creating kind of 5 different cannabis grows, 5 different states. And from there, I created what we built at TokenX called Davos as a solution for the cannabis industry to be able to communicate better. For regulators to talk to banks to talk to regulators, operators, but mainly is to get cash off the street and into the system and in a very safe place.
Okay, my name is James Ray. I'm a recovering accountant, CPA. I went to work out of school with Arthur Anderson. Some of you may not even remember that, right? But I spent most of my professional life in consulting for Accenture and others. And so my last corporate job was a global managing director for selling payments in treasury. And when I left JP Morgan, it was right just in time for COVID. And I got involved in trying to build a safe, reliable payment platform within the regulatory body that still exists.
Again?
Sure. Hello again, Dan Rhoda. I already introduced myself earlier. What I will add is that I do think it's interesting and amusing that we're once again here as a conference, people in this cannabis financial services ecosystem convening and sharing thoughts and wisdom and guidance. And we once again find ourselves in the position of speculating when might we see some federal reform. As I shared when I introduced myself earlier, I co-founded, built, scaled, and exited a FinTech company called Attica for the cannabis space. And for the very first time, we were out there giving an investor pitch. This was in 2017. The number one objection we would get from prospective investors is, well, what happens to your business when the federal government passes some kind of cannabis reform? Isn't that just going to destroy everything you've been working on? And find myself sitting here all these years later, not looking in the rear view at federal legalization or reform, but having it still once again be a thing that's somewhat down the road. And as we just heard, go over in some pretty significant detail, it's maybe not all that much of a panacea for financial institutions or for operators. Maybe it's not all of the great things you thought it might be. What better place than here, and what better time than now to talk about the things we've done and are doing that are working and are providing solutions that are helping operators solve their cash pain points and helping financial institutions solve all the various difficulties that go along with opening up their doors to cannabis businesses. Because everybody here and everybody attending the PDC conference across the street over the next 2 days are all a testament to the fact that there are solutions, there are operators and innovators who have created solutions to meet businesses where they are with what they need. And if we all just sat around waiting for the federal government to get it done for us, we've been waiting like a decade by now. So this is a good thing that we haven't done that.
Well, and the point that we'll get to, this is an investable market if it's done, right? And you had a successful exit from a FinTech.
We raised about $2.5 million in a seed round and a Series A round to get out of it off the ground. And when we exited 5 years later, it was at a $30 million valuation. So there certainly are investable opportunities and continue to be investable opportunities in this ecosystem.
So we'll talk about one quick story. We go to these things, and EMC stood up in 2019, and I've been a payment FinTech forever. And so you go to these conferences, and there's always some ding dong on stage that says, you should come use my payment solution because I have a letter from Visa. I have a special letter from Visa that nobody else has, so you should come to me. And it's all you can do, not like shooting from the back of the room. This is like whack-a-mole, right? All these non-compliant solutions. So there are compliant solutions, especially using distributed ledger technology, blockchain, AI, things that are emerging and that are here. So our plan was, Dan, you were going to give a little history on FinTech, and then you were going to talk a bit about the blockchain AI. He's ridiculously smart, get him cornered when you're drinking. And James, you were going to talk about this is investable. You've seen it again. It's investable at multiples. So,
Sure, and you know, I like that you started by mentioning some of the Web3 and DeFi, decentralized finance buzzwords, because there are some incredible new technologies out there that simply were not there when the first states to legalize medical or adult use cannabis came along and FinTech guidance was passed. But with those new technologies emerging, I think it really is good to take some time here to kind of look back at some of the technologies in this sort of what I think in the future we'll look at as maybe Gen 1 or the first wave of cannabis tech and cannabis payments tech, going back to when the industry first started. Of course, you've all probably seen or been marketed to many of these credit card workarounds, things that employ somewhat deceptive practices that kind of run the range from borderline gray areas to absolutely just completely fraudulent. Like, if you look at the case of what happened to Ease, a payment processing and e-commerce company from the early cannabis days, the scheme they put in place, and I believe scheme was the word that the federal judge used in that one, did in fact land a couple of the executives of that company in prison. Meanwhile, you've got cannabis payment solutions that are less labeling non-compliant, but very much operating in gray areas, and have continued to do so with varying degrees of success over the past decade. One of the most popular, ubiquitous ones that you see in the cannabis space today is what's the cashless ATM or reverse ATM. And while I think we're all pretty well aware that the major credit card rails, which is to say that these MasterCard networks have a pretty explicit prohibition on cannabis and do not intend to change their cannabis policy until after a pretty broad change in federal law, although it'd be interesting to hear what the folks from FISA would have to say later this week for anybody attending BBC conferences. I think they're probably closer to the pulse on that than I am. These cashless ATM providers that have popped up have primarily been utilizing the debit and ATM networks that are maybe a bit less aggressive in their prohibition of cannabis commerce. However, some of these solutions or workarounds still operate in gray areas or worse, and many have operated successfully for a while. Others have been shut down, and in some cases in pretty dramatic fashion, including shutdowns of thousands of merchants on 420, the number one retail sales day of cannabis last year. You've also got a world of app-based payment solutions. These are generally more compliant, as historically it's been an ACH debit or ACH credit transaction that's powering the back end of those, so you're not pushing the transaction through the card rails like you get on the ACH rails, which have been quietly permissive to cannabis as long as the participating financial institutions have been operating within the confines of the guidance. The challenge for most of these ACH-based methods has been in driving user adoption. There have been many that have come and gone with the benefit of having raised some venture capital and utilize that venture capital to go out and market and try to get consumers to adopt the payment tech. In most cases, that is also they've found it difficult to see traction there. Many of those companies have come on at this point. So, like I said, I really do think we're going to see the same wave. There's been a lot of payments tech come and go. None of it has been truly compliant. None of it has really seen a significant success in driving consumer adoption. There's a lot to be excited about as well.
Well, I'll share on the payment geek side. So the Fed Bank has a group called the Faster Payments Council, and it's been around 10 years. And I'm on the digital assets working group there, and we're planning on writing a blog on cannabis as a use case. And if you want to geek out, go to the Faster Payments Council, and you'll see all kinds of blogs in there on disaster and other things. But that group of banking geeks is very interested in this as a use case. Cannabis is a use case, and how do you do it compliantly? So, David, don't empty your brain to us. We don't have a lifetime. But can you tell us about a little bit about your background and the grows and all of that? Because that's super applicable.
Like I said, Open 5 helped consult Open 5 grows across 5 different states. Every time I would do a grow, we have the licensing process, which is an absolute nightmare. Then you get through that nightmare, and then you have the constant nightmare of, is the bank going to call today and tell me to get all of my money out? Am I going to be able to make my payroll? It's like the sword of Damocles just hanging over your head constantly over and over again. So what ended up happening is, in a state I won't mention, we were robbed in an operation there in a transaction. And that's when I was like, there has to be a better way. And that's when we leaned towards the blockchain solution. Initially it was, let's look at stable coins, let's do this, but you can't buy stable coins with the stinky weed cash you have in your mattress. You have to convert it, you have to deposit it, you have to sign up, you have to register. There's just so many different processes, and we couldn't get an account on a major exchange to be able to do that. So that's when I was like, there has to be a better way to do this. And we came up with a compliant way of geofencing transactions. We need everything intra-state. Nothing crosses the state line. Everything stays within the state. All the information is regularly available for the regulators, for the bankers, for the operators to be able to speak to one another and have the conversation about compliance. Because that's the major thing. It's really, really hard as an operator to talk to your banker because you're afraid of your bankers coming to call you in 20 minutes to take your bank account. I can only imagine how a banker feels when a regulator calls. What this system does, it makes, we have end-to-end encryption, you can talk to one another, you can schedule your on-site visits that you have to do. You can even watch their grow process. You can make sure they're not trimming it and getting multiples and things like that. But there's just so many different things that, just the tools aren't there for the industry. It's because no one's ever made anything for the industry. As an operator and being in it every day, this is a project that is just completely passionate about. I'm completely passionate about simply because of the pain it causes. People were talking earlier about like taking away 280, people not being able to get insurance, people losing their bank accounts. Like that impacts the family, that impacts communities, and it's just little things that need to change. And one of the things that we were able to utilize was the distributed ledger system. I hate the term crypto, but not a crypto. We actually have a use case, or not like a beanie baby, like everything else. But at the end of the day, what we do is we have a digital asset that is a representation of your cannabis dollar. That cannabis dollar has a representation of its legal sale, and that is an immutable, auditable trail that will follow that transaction for the rest of the time. And that's power, because as we were talking earlier, the laws can change. It can go from Schedule 3, then back to Schedule 1. They can make a whole, like, you don't know. But what you're going to be able to prove is, I was in compliance. I am in, and here's my track record of my compliance.
I love it because there are some members of Congress that we meet with that still think that Reefer Madness was a documentary. And they carry a checkbook in their coat pocket, and that's tech for them. And so when we explain what distributed ledger technology is, what blockchain is, and that it's immutable. If it touched somebody's hand, that person can't pull that record out. It stays. And I think that's getting some folks who are less trusting of any system that even if you wanted to delete a record, you couldn't, because it's shared all other places in the blockchain, and that seems to be getting some good traction. So, James, so we've heard about a successful exit. We know that we can do it compliantly. We've heard about lending. So you talked about this being an investable market, and our title is Investor for You. So it's you.
It's me. Well, I want to leave you with a quote. This quote is that it's from William Gibson, and it says, "The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed." He said it in 1984. And ultimately, these technologies we're talking about are being used to create very innovative solutions. To my right, an exit. But the banking system is old, regulated, and it should be. And we have to maintain compliance. And the technology we're talking about is going to make it easier for anyone in the cannabis space to be compliant and legal and increase the volume because it'll take away the hassle. So David and his team have built a platform that will execute transactions. Banks will be compliant, and the industry is primed for growth. And so that's what we're betting on in terms of, and go ahead, Dan.
Very done. One of the things that I think is really most interesting to talk about here is the potential of some of these big advancements. And the three I think that are really most potentially exciting or have the most broad applicability to the cannabis industry, to some of the main points that we've heard talked about today. We opened up with a panel of regulators. It's something that they all talked about, or at least touched on a little bit, was some of the pain around seed-to-sale tracking, which is something that we all know is implemented with the best of intentions, but has seen varying success in achieving those intentions in different states, and has been, let's just say, certainly one of the many needs that operators have to navigate when operating a business compliantly in the space. And meanwhile, this thing exists now called the blockchain, a immutable distributed ledger, and there are several different versions of this. Some that do different things better than others, but knowing that this is a thing that conceptually exists and has achieved such broad adoption, although unevenly distributed to the point of the quote you referenced, knowing that that exists and is out there, and then looking at what operators and regulators are forced to deal with these antiquated track and trace systems and what little benefit they have relative to the problems that they create all across the supply chain is something that I found just kind of mind-blowing. And so I wanted to kind of flag that and would love to hear your take on that. Aside from blockchain, we'd love to know about the other technologies I think are the most potentially exciting as applied to the cannabis space are tokenization of real-world assets and smart contracts. So,
Well, exactly. I mean, it's kind of just piggybacking on what you're saying, being able to tokenize real-world assets. So let's just say I am a cannabis operator, I have an inventory of oil. I want to be able to market that oil. I could tokenize that asset to someone and sell it that way, or I could utilize that token as collateral, essentially, to try to receive some sort of loan. So just those tiny little processes that are here. I would say, like, if you try to do that in 2018, you're paying $1 million to tokenize it. Now it's like a 2-week AI little process, I mean, it's just definitely, the future is now, in that regard. It's just getting the banks and the regulators, as Kat said earlier, to do pilot programs. We've done a pilot program in Nevada, we've done a pilot program in Arizona, just showing not basically efficacy of the system, but for them, they get higher tax revenue. They get their money at a higher tax rate. Instead of having to pay to collect a paid account and then deposit it, they're getting their digital asset that they can transfer to cash immediately. They can transfer to cash at a less rate than they would on a traditional rail unit. So, I mean, the benefits for the platform is the entire system. It's a holistic solution to the problem. And I can't change federal law. I wish I could. There's so many things that would change, I promise, but I can't. Yeah, but maybe one day I'll run you guys to black. No. But at the end of the day, it's just more just as a lot of people said, meeting the industry where they are. You know, a lot of operators, they're not tech savvy, they're not even bank savvy, they're not savvy, you know, but they can grow really good cannabis. And that's what the industry needs. What we want to do is give them the tools to where if you're a restaurant operator, you wouldn't be going through these headaches, you wouldn't be going through these nightmares. And more people die from eating bad food at restaurants than they do from cannabis. But banks aren't asking to see their cameras, asking to see their food orders. When was the last time you cleaned your kitchen? You don't have to answer those questions. You have to answer those questions with cannabis. And what we do is we facilitate tools to make that easier and a more comfortable process between people.
You just brought up meet the cannabis businesses where they are. So from being at these conferences and the CRBs realizing once it legalizes and Visa, MasterCard, and whatever traditional payment rails, it might be 7%, it might be 9%, there's going to be chargebacks, you're going to have your payment system pulled out from under you. And they're saying, look, I'm used to cashless ATMs or some other thing where I might even be making a few bucks on it. Now you want me to pay 9% and have chargebacks. So we started today talking about long haul solutions that are, it doesn't matter if legalizes, deschedules, whatever, it's here for the long haul. And with the distributed ledger, nobody can mess with that. Whether it's seeking to sale or money, it touched those hands. It's not going to be.
In the world of payment processing, something gets designated as high risk, not necessarily because of the legal or regulatory risk that surrounds that vertical, but because primarily, correct me if I'm wrong, of the likelihood of a chargeback. But with a distributed ledger and an immutable transaction record, the idea of a chargeback is almost completely out the window. As a consumer, it becomes very, very difficult for you to claim that a fraudulent transaction has occurred and that you did not actually purchase the thing when the entire internet can see in the blockchain that in fact it did.
Especially like our tech, where we have an identity aspect where we take biometrics. You know, we'll take like individual data from like devices and things like that. So the guy can't say, I didn't make that purchase. Like, no, you totally did. You know, there's no way you didn't.
Excellent. So I know we're coming up to happy hour and we all want to be happy. Do you guys have more points to make? I've got a brief summary, but.
Just one that I want to touch on, which David touched on briefly as well, and is the potential of the utilization of tokenization as it applies to cannabis inventory across the supply chain to better allow lenders to perfect and execute on a security interest that will allow them to deepen the value of that aspect of the creditor's asset as borrowing base. As we mentioned in the lending now, lenders are primarily looking to real estate value because it is purely aside from being one of the largest portions of the typical cannabis business's balance sheet among that asset stack, it is the asset that is the least complex to put a mortgage or lien on and then foreclose and take possession of in the event of a default. And as you heard earlier, even that is not without a number of complexities, but it's significantly less complicated and legally perilous than the idea of a lender coming in and repossessing an entire warehouse full of cannabis. And all of the logistical and legal concerns that come along with that. With tokenization, however, it is not necessary to take physical possession of that inventory in order to exercise your security interest there. You could perhaps simply quarantine it in metric until such a point as that factor invoice is paid in full. So it really opens up the lending potential and the value of liquidity within that portion of the balance sheet.
I think we need to limit our own blockchain distributed ledger.
No, I would say, you know, just quick, you know, there's a lot of talk today about, you know, what's going to happen. Can they help us, whatever. This is a solution that we can do ourselves. That's the thing, it's about helping ourselves. You know, Kat had the projections up for, this is when this started, I think like it was like 4 or 5 years. This has been going on for way longer than that. You know, I think the Safer Banking Act has been in Congress 14 times now, something like that. You know, it's just, there is no solution coming. And like you said earlier, if I'm not going to invest, I heard this so many times, I'm not investing, 20 minutes are going to change it. I was like, yeah, it's been a long 20 minutes. It's been about 15 years. And that's the thing, it's about building tools for ourselves and being able to utilize this wave of AI, this wave of technology that's come out, and build something that is built to help the industry flourish. You know, that's the thing. Like people, it's owning and operating, having to have armed security guards and all this other stuff. That's not a good look. I want cannabis to look like just a regular store you go in, not a arms dealership. Not you know. At one point in Oklahoma, we had like 17 armed people working for the company. I had a small militia, like typically just to work for the company. That's not what we need in this industry to take the stigma that you were saying that's been created about the prohibition. And that's another thing I would love for the comments that say, why was it ever Schedule 1? Let's have that conversation, but I don't need everyone to go down that route.
James, should we plug in?
Just one. 2 points. One is this brings efficiency in any cannabis business. And the second one, as long as we're state by state, then the community banks, credit unions, with this technology, they will be able to. They can use this technology to play their role in those states.
So stay here for a minute. Lily, can we just do our highlights? So, before we go out for drinks, thank you to Cannabis for hosting, for all the staff. This is amazing. We'll applaud you more up on the upstairs. Thank you to everyone for being here for the help drive EMC's mission to normalize cannabis financial services ecosystem. That term came up again and again and again. Didn't ask you this and the goal of making all transactions, financial transactions, transparent, traceable, taxable, which talks to both sides of the aisle. We need to see Linda coming at some point from the state to tell us where to go. On our regulatory panel, which was fabulous, data came up again and again and again, driving informed regulations. And we had a panel of pioneers, a lot of firsts up there, so thank you for that. Nicole, you talked about the Cannabis Regulator Association, how the regulator, that might happen on the rooftop. Talked about in California that for every pound of licensed flower, that there's 8 pounds of illicit out there. And did I get it right? 60% of consumption in California, they think is illicit consumption. Those are some really compelling numbers for why we need to have proper financial services and blockchain, so you can see all of that. Tabitha, you talked about Maryland's outreach to credit unions to support them to scale. That is amazing. You got to come to the next Cannabis Banking Symposium, because that's something everybody wants to hear. And you talked about lending terms, which fed right into our panel. Dominique talking about collaboration in industry and across other agencies. I think those who haven't met cool folks like you guys, think that regulators sit in Ivory Tower and don't come out. We're seeing there's a lot of collaboration. And then data, dashboard, transparent all is huge. Shakira, you talked about every 6 months updating and redrafting the regs. That is very responsive and a lot of work. And that equity is not a program, it must be an ecosystem. And I think everybody liked this. Regulation isn't always the best path forward. Have we gone too far sometimes? I think most of the banks fell out of their chairs. So, in Q&A, Tabitha answered a question about organized stakeholders versus one-off. So one of the things I will ask all the attendees, please do not barrage our regulator. Yes. We've done these events before, and the guest speakers just get 25 emails from all y'all. Organized. Let's come together. That's one of the reasons EMC is a nonprofit. We can come together, we can approach, and be organized in what we're doing. And Kat, you talked about pilots. that was music department.